Welcome to the 2-Month Review, a weekly podcast from 3% and Open Letter, in which we take a book, we break it down bit by bit, we read those bits, we come here, we talk about those bits, we say things, we make jokes, we kind of break down books. I'm out of things. I'm Chad Post from Open Letter Books. I'm here as always with Brian Wood.
Hello, Chad. So good to see you tonight.
And we're also joined this week. Nice. We're also joined this week by Anthony Blake, who is the newest member of Open Letter Books. Anthony, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having
me. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I've never met you, Anthony. I want to say, introduce yourself. What's going on here?
Yeah, I feel like we've met because I'm a big fan of the podcast. So.
Oh, okay, cool.
I like your role as kind of comic relief curmudgeon. So it's great.
The village idiot will be played by Brian. Yeah.
It's true. I don't think that many people realize how much of a role you play on here.
Oh, it's important. I feel like he's like a stand-in for the audience. Whenever I'm thinking of something, Brian will vocalize it for me. So that's great.
That's a good. But so where Anthony?
So a little less about you and more about me. Please continue.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So I'm the new marketing assistant for Open Letter Books. I'm really excited. I started today. Had a wonderful 3-hour orientation with the University of Rochester.
Did you get a ham sandwich out of that?
I did.
See, I told you.
And afterwards,
you're supposed to get a ham sandwich.
Yeah, we had like a bagel. No ham sandwich. Not quite the same. I just finished my MFA in poetry at the University of Arkansas. So.
Oh, that's a waste of time.
It was great.
No.
It was 4 years. It was a long time. So I'm glad to be out of Arkansas and back in the world. So
what's Fayetteville like?
It's like a little Walmart town. That's where all the money's from, and so everything's funded by that. It's not a bad place. It's not.
Every time you turn a corner, there's a big smiley face that says "Great savings here."
Yeah. Pretty much.
Now I'm trying to remember at because it's supposed to be a really great MFA program over there in Arkansas. Is it a short story writer? Is it Brockmeyer or not Kevin Brockmeyer?
No, he's around though. He's in the.
There was like a super big time short story writer that was.
Ellen Gilchrist is there still. She's kind of an aging great from before.
True Detective.
True Detective. They're filming season 3 in Fayetteville right now, actually.
Exciting.
Hopefully it's actually good. Yeah, I know some people who are in it, or their houses are in it, or their dogs are in it as extras. So
my house was in True Detective. That's not necessarily a good thing.
No.
That first season is wonderful, though.
The first season's great. The second season we'll forget about. Yeah.
I didn't watch the second season.
The one warning I have with Rochester, so I moved here like you did in the summertime, and I thought, wow, these are like some of the nicest, coolest people ever. This place is great.
Yeah.
And then the winter happens, and they all those nice people just shrivel into assholes for like 4 months. So,
dude, he lives on Park Ave, though. He's around where everyone is.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
All the time. I know.
Boardwalk was taken, so he had to settle for Park Ave, huh? Shame. Oh, that's a lot of fun. I think you're gonna like Park Ave.
Yeah, I do already. I think. Yeah. Who is that?
That is Brian's daughter that everyone can hear. That's Isaac singing "Maybe Fireman Sam." Probably not.
She kept saying "Raise the Roof." I don't know. I shouldn't have let her. I let her listen to Now That's What I Call '90s music, and now she just wants to pump up the jams and raise the roof. But
I'm also, before we get into this book, I'm going to say that I'm giving a special promotion. This week's podcast is brought to you by Moon Palace Books out of Minneapolis. And if anyone else, any other bookstore wants to sponsor our podcast, they should send us gear.
Yeah, and we can do openings or whatever. It's like
we can do special openings. But you send us gear. We wear your stuff on YouTube. We talk about you. So Moon Palace Books in Minneapolis, one of the best bookstores in the country, hands down. They're amazing. They just moved into a new space, which is giant, and it has like a restaurant, drinks, big old bookstore.
I see Moon.
I'm wearing the shirt.
Oh, cool.
It looks like a penis.
Is it a sloth?
It's a sloth.
Oh, cool.
Oh.
Yeah, but it's supposed to intentionally look like a palace.
So quick question. I don't know what your segue is for this, but looking at that giant stack of the book, I felt this chapter section kicked my ass because it like made me realize how I don't know anything and I haven't read anything. And I felt so dumb reading this section. I hope I'm not alone in that, but I was like, oh my God, I don't know who any of these people are hardly. And like,
I knew 90% of those people. Here it is. I knew most of the people, but Anthony, you only read this section, correct?
Yeah, I have very little context for this. So I jumped this. Probably the only time I've jumped to page 189 in a book and started reading there. So
just wait for Pessoa. So do we want to give like a recap up until this point, or does it even really matter?
I don't know if it really necessarily matters.
There are a couple things that tie together, but I mean, maybe we'll let those come out.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple like knots that are kind of in the beginning that you kind of get here, but
yeah, and going forward you will, but that will happen next week, so or 2 weeks from now. But we'll leave that. So this chapter, how would you describe it, Brian? You said it was like kicking your ass and all the names. How would you put it together?
Oh geez.
This is usually my bit of like making it really simplistic.
All right, so I mean, like, there's like this. She gets the. I'm trying to think. Is the frame the biography? I know it starts with a description of like some young lady. I forget who it is. The teeth.
It begins with the story of the young lady who, she doesn't really. But there's the main. I think the main thrust is
that segues into Levin, talking about who's Levin. There's two Levins, but maybe it's only one Levin because of how chaotic the times were, right? And basically, like, Levin is this obscure footnote, and she's trying to take this footnote and give it the life and the story and the history and the honor that it deserves. And so she talks about all of these like futurist, this brief like flash of futurist Russian writers that all die around World War II. Basically, they all just get like just smudged out of existence, and like one or two maybe survive, but
in terms of their literature.
Their literature, or like one of them has a bunch of art and makes some money off of some art or whatever. But like,
yep.
But yeah, like basically, it's trying to remember things that are forgotten.
So and I don't know how to speak the word. Okay, so the main thing is all about Dubravka Levin, and Levin is someone that we'll come back to a bunch of times here. But so he was one of the members of the Oberoi. I'm not sure how you actually say that word, but it was a Russian writing group that's sort of connected to the formalists, like you say, but also like a little bit assertist. Daniel Karms is maybe the most popular and most well-known of all of those writers. Anthony, you may have encountered him as a poet because his writing is like very strange, surreal, but with like a formalist sort of Schlossian bent to it. He's super fun. There's a book that came out from Overlook not too many years ago that Matvey Yankelevich and a few other people have helped translate, and he's spectacular. Like, his stories are super sarcastic, funny, strange, wonderful. You both would love him, but he's not super, super well known. But in the setup of this chapter, Levin's like one of the characters that's involved, one of the writers that's involved with this group, and yet one who like dies young and doesn't really have anything that he's left behind. Like some children's stories of not a lot of importance, and these rumors about this novel. And this novel that might have existed, maybe existed. And then there's a lot of meshing of stuff, I think, where it becomes like, did Levin maybe survive and maybe continue onwards and not die? Because there's a lot of name problems when you're talking about Soviet Russia and people at that point in time trying to get out of Russia, move around, be able to like to continue living after the Stalinist purges. And there's a chance with these two Levins that were born at the same time, around the same place, supposedly died around the same time, that this Levin continued onwards. And within that, then there's this idea of like, maybe he did write this novel. Maybe this novel existed. There's like hints of it. And there's a lot of fun stuff, I think, that comes up with that I want to say, I guess, towards the end, in relation to Levin and in relation to Ira Ferris, that writes the book that's about him. But the frame that you're talking about, Brian, is that the narrator is back, like having discovered Levin and wanting to talk about this writer and like bring them back. And that something for like the future isn't so much like finding authors who were like important in talking about them in new ways, but finding authors whose works never made it and putting them into the mainstream. That there was no work there. There was no novel. And writing about this non-existent novel is more interesting than the novel itself, which is that sort of Fox-like structure, right? Like the Fox smuggles that into culture. And I think that's sort of the frame. And then Ferris, Ira Ferris, or Irina, I think it's just Ira, is always referred to, but both, is it both? Yeah. Writes a book also about Levin, in which it's 99 chapters and like tells like the story of his life and pages. Is it just pages or is it in chapters as well? Whatever.
I thought it was 99 pages, but I don't know. It doesn't matter.
But a bitch ain't one. Is that one of the? Is that the phrase? No. But whatever it is, like it's a certain number, it's very specific 99 pages / chapters, and goes through and explains his life and has all these questions about it, which is I don't know that Dubravka meant this, but it's sort of a sly reference to Georges Perrec's Life of Users manual that only has 99 chapters, and it's set up to have 100 because it's set up as a grid, and it skips the last one because there's always has to be one flaw in the system, and there's always one thing that you miss. And in this case, there's like this whole story of Levin's biography, which is which I will say, Levin was a real person. That was a real guy.
Yeah,
but
that's real.
This biography is not entirely true.
Yeah,
it's fabricated in that way, but it leaves open that one thread, that one like flaw that maybe this is true, or maybe there's more to it, or maybe there's more to that story.
That's funny because I took it as a Pale Fire reference.
Pale Fire is coming next.
And I could be wrong, but I thought with Pale Fire
has 99 lines.
It has 99 lines.
999 lines.
999 on a 1,000-line poem. It's missing the very last one, right? Like abruptly stops.
That's a reference to Life of Users manual too. I'm going to preface. That's not true. I'm making that up, but whatever. Life of Users manual is 99 things and is connected sort of to these people as well. But Nabokov obviously too.
Sure.
Nabokov is probably better. But
the thing that made it pop into my mind was just the thing about Nabokov's poems being overrated.
Yeah.
So, and Nabokov's poem would be the Pale Fire, the fake poet that does the right. That was the only thing that made me.
Yeah, fair enough.
Maybe think of that. I don't know.
You're absolutely right.
No, I'm wrong on most stuff. So I hope to be wrong on that. I'd hate to buck the trend. So.
I'm sliding Life of Users manual in there for one person in particular.
Okay.
And they know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So we did hear of Levin earlier in the story, right? The widow is the widow the first one that brings up Levin?
Yep. The widow is married to Levin. So this is the part that Anthony, you will never know, or you won't know until you read it, but you wouldn't know at this moment in time, having jumped ahead, is that earlier in the book, the narrator, each of these 6 parts, the narrator, they're sort of standalone, and the narrator's putting together a piece. But in the second section of Balancing Art, there's a whole bit about how she is at a writer's conference and is on a panel with this widow who's married to this famous writer whose name is Levin, who's passed away. And since he's passed away, she's become very like glorified as having been the person who took care of his manuscripts and his estate, and like helped build his reputation and all that kind of stuff. And there's various hints in that chapter about how she's maybe invented his books. Like she sort of found them and made them. And she talks about the fox as being like the one who sneaks things into culture and is able to like bring them into, you have to be fox-like and be able to sneak things in and play around with like what's expected from you and how you can smuggle in these narratives. And that really then reflects back on this, where it seems like the widow could have been married to this Levin, even though the Levin in her chapter is never named, the first name is never given. There's a chance that she could be married to this Levin, and that he really never wrote any of those books. He never finished that novel, and she's the one smuggling in parts of his books and writing them on his behalf and creating this idea of this Levin that's then discovered by our narrator and discovered by Ira Ferris.
So yeah, check this out on page 70. Because yeah, when I thought about it, like it started to become problematic when I was thinking of like, wait, if the widow was married to Levin, so she's like super old then, right? Because he died at 40.
She says she meets him in the 60s. She says she meets him in the 60s, and if he didn't die in the 40s, he was born in the 1919. Am I misremembering that? You read your part. I'll find his birthday.
All right. So this is the widow quote on the bottom of page 70. And then again, she went on, we are all vampires and feed on the blood of others. In this free-for-all of promiscuity, there are people who do not depend on others, and this makes them unusually attractive but also despised. Levin was one such person. Literature was his only abiding fascination, perhaps because everything else could be taken from him. Literature, nobody could take away from him. That goes back into like books can't burn, right?
Yep.
Literature, nobody could take from him. Does that kind of allure make writers great? This I can't say. Levin was obsessed with literature his whole life. Literature was his only passion. You mentioned an episode with Nabokov. So, there's a little Nabokov in there. All right.
Nabokov's the next chapter, too.
Okay.
100%. It's named after him, in fact, or is right there. Yeah. But yeah, so according to this, I don't know if you say Dover, I don't pronounce things right. Levin was born in 1904. And if the widow met him in the 60s, he would have been 54-ish onwards. So 50 in his 50s, which is completely possible. He dies. She's still young. She carries on his tradition. That's possible. Also, in case you don't remember, go back to page 1.
What do you mean in case? I don't remember.
3. Go back to page 3.
Page 3. That was like so long ago. There is no page 3. There's a page 5.
Yep. Flip back.
No, the Iferis reference.
Which is the reference to, is the character from this chapter.
Yeah,
which is
now
fake. We've gotten, which is fake.
Which is not real, yeah.
As we foregrounded at that time, without giving too much away, this Ferris is not is invented, is a character in the book. And the magnificent art of translating life into a story and vice versa is the book that the narrator is reading at that point in time about a character who maybe never wrote their novel and may have been smuggled in to other places, and has that quote that she refers to at the end of this part. So this chapter is like super naughty.
Yeah. Naughty? Naughty, full of knots. Yes.
Not.
Yeah, I get the feeling like this is the chapter where, like, I mean, there's some like wonderful like paragraphs that I put boxes around. Like, this is incredible. But I feel like this is where she has like her kind of chuckle and laugh at me, the reader.
You thought you understood? Nope.
Yeah.
How was it? Yeah. What was it like, Anthony, reading just this chapter?
It feels like pretty self-contained. So, you know, it has the beginning, middle, and end. So I think what I felt like I was missing from it was a way that the fox motif is working elsewhere. So it comes up a couple times here, and I can tell that it's doing more than I'm aware of. But it's hard for me to access it because there's clearly some like mythological elements and some other things that aren't happening in this section.
I don't know if Brian's gonna chime in, but we've talked about like on various other episodes about like the prevalence or non-prevalence or non-naming or non-specificity of the fox motif, and this is one of the ones where I feel like it's most like hits all of the things that came before, like all of the different ways in which that can be interpreted sort of show up here. Fox as the totem of the writer, as like the smuggler, as someone who takes from someone else and takes away from something to make themselves alive. Like all those pieces are here. Like this chapter, like this time through, paying it so close attention to like all these details to talk to you guys about it, like this section really sang. And like I read it and was like, damn, like this is everything. And what you said, Brian, about everything being buried under all these like terms and names that you might not know, or like authors you might not recognize, like just really seems like, and to me a little bit like there's so much there that you're not sure how to parse that. And that's part of the fun of it in a way, that it's like, I'm gonna hide something within here and you're not gonna quite see it. And the one that I couldn't find that I looked up a few times, and I looked this up before, and I know Dubravka always says to ask her questions and whatever, but I didn't want to in this case, is the critic Valerie Dimshits. I'm pretty sure not real.
I needed him to be real though.
I want him to be real so bad, but I've searched last night. Like my upstairs neighbors came home and I was on the porch like Googling frantically, and they're like, hey, what are you doing? I was like, trying to figure out if this is real. Do you think Valerie Dimshits is real? And they're like, what are you doing?
No.
Like,
did you have a tinfoil hat on while you were doing
it? I did. That's usually how I sit outside, actually. It's good for sunning.
I have a marvelous tinfoil hat moment where so I was looking up the book that was published, the not real book by Ferris. I think the publisher was Asen, A-S-E-N. And so I looked up to see if that was real or not. And there is like it's in London, and I think they do something for nationalism. It's like the Association of Nationalistic something or other.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I was like, oh, I wonder if there's any connection with that, but there's not. But then I saw they have a contest for essays, and one of the winners of the essay contest in 2006, his last name was Fox. So there's
holy shit.
I invented a connection that's not even there. So you could the word Fox, you can go down a rabbit hole with Fox.
Oh God.
And Matthew Fox. We haven't even played Matthew Fox.
His name is John Fox, and he's on the board of this ASEN publishing group. So
also former NFL coach, I suppose. I always assume when I read Asen both times, and I also didn't ask her this, and I don't think that it's intentional, but it reminds me every time of artist publishing, which anyone who's involved with like Russian literature or small press publishing from like the 80s and 90s will know what I'm talking about. But Artist Press was set up in, I believe, Ann Arbor, and they did only Russian books translated in English. And most people always thought that they were like some sort of front, because their books were very weirdly available. They would like never ship things on like in normal ways. Everything about it seemed very circumspect. But they did a ton of like Russian literature that no one else is publishing, including they did a Master and Margarita that was then picked up by Vintage. And that's the edition that Vintage has in print today, is the artist one. And they did a ton, like just a ton of like those, the mid-century and before Russian writers. And they eventually got bought by Overlook. And I think Overlook has the rights to most of their books. But they were like a really prominent press that also everyone thought was part of the KGB.
Okay. Yeah, I pulled up the Asen website. It's the Association for the Study of Ethnicity and Nationalism.
That's perfect. There's nothing more perfect than that.
No, I know. We live in a world of nations, it says.
Oh, God.
Holy shit.
Yeah, a school of economic and political science, but it's a student-led research association.
The other part they left out was that Ira Ferris is hinted at to be Levin's daughter in here.
Yeah.
On a couple of cases. So you have the widow and the daughter, and like all of this, like I guess the question I had at the end of it as I was like seeing all these things ring and how it like all really just pulled these threads together a little bit, and like does this kind of amazing thing with like literary history plus like this game playing plus like whatever else, is like what. So if everything's sort of about this kind of smuggling of this idea of a non-existent book into existence, if that's part of one of the motifs of that, like what more is she playing at here? Like there's so many, I feel like there's more to the game than I'm even getting. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Like there's like, for instance, like 231, whatever the case, Ferris's fascination with Levin's biography could simply be explained by the way she perceived her own life as a footnote appended to a text rather than as a text in its own right. That's been mentioned several times in the book, right?
Yep.
And Levin was a footnote, and like there's this. I kind of skimmed ahead like that one. What is it? The part 6? No,
part 5.
Part 5 is something about footnotes, right?
Little Miss Footnote.
Little Miss Footnote.
We have a lot. That episode's going to be loaded, by the way, because we have a lot to talk about.
I'm going to be loaded.
Welcome to Rochester, Anthony.
Yeah. and again, there were several parts, again, with this one with Master Margarita, about manuscripts don't burn.
The manuscripts don't burn. I also love that, like, one of the references that Ferris uses that same quote of the "Come on, show us the manuscript." Is that right? I'm misremembering it, but whatever. But
the
in
translation
Cyrillic
wouldn't work. Yeah.
Yeah, using it in Cyrillic at the start of every chapter, which is like another code. Like, yeah, was it Pete last week who was talking about he was mentioning the Pynchon sort of like codedness of things, and this is the first time that when I hit that, I was like, yeah, you're right. There is like a weird sort of like information exchange that happens within the book and within ideas within the book that it's really interesting. I don't
Page 215. Ferris left the phrase in Russian because she felt no translation would do it justice.
Which that's one of those books that like every translation everyone complains about.
No, but it's interesting though, because again, like the whole thing with Ferris and the quote is the magnificent art of translating life into a story and vice versa. The real literary fun begins the moment a story slips an author's control, when it starts behaving like a rotating lawn sprinkler, flying off every which way, when grass begins to sprout, not because of any moisture, but out of thirst for a near source of moisture. So I just find it's the gamesmanship, right? Like
when you write your stories or novel, Brian, like do you lose control at some point like that? Like there's something about that that's like she's going along, or the idea that the author has like a sort of plot, but then it sort of like keeps spraying everywhere and things keep growing and growing and growing. Do you have that sense when you write?
Yeah, like in early drafts, absolutely. I'm really curious. I want to talk to her about writing a little bit, just because of to me, she sets these things up that seem kind of, just like, oh, okay, there's a reference about this, like a mouse, and here's a reference about Swiss cheese, and then later there's a connection of the mouse and the cheese, and like a mouse going through cheese. Like she has this way of stacking the layers, or like having the different layers and then having them all come together braided like beautifully, or the threads, I guess would be a better way of mixing my metaphors. there's the different threads that seem separate and apart from each other, and then by the end of it you're like, holy shit, this whole thing is one incredible weave. Like, how the hell is she looming this all together? Like so I'd really like to, it'd be a boring conversation to have on a podcast, but I'd really like to talk to her how she does that, or if she has that in mind, or if she just kind of sees the way things are going and then kind of hides the seams of the stitching she's doing. But yeah, she's incredible at that.
It's funny that you use all those stitching sort of metaphors, because one of her first big novels is Seppi Speck in the Jaws of Life, which is all based around like seamstressing, and there's like even like little denotations along the margins as to like where you knit things together and where you like hem them in other words involving seamstressing.
Seamstressing. I like that.
Don't know. This is the first moment. This is a good moment too, where this really feels like this becomes a novel. Like where we were talking in the last few weeks about like how different pieces seem like.
No, it was a novel. Last one, Devil's Garden, was super novelistic. What are you talking about?
Devil's Novels was very novelistic, but this is more Devil's Garden was very novelistic within its section.
Sure.
And this one sort of pieces together some of those earlier sections and makes it even more novel and reinforces that novelistic vibe.
Yeah. This one to me, again, it was one of those like heavy, like the middle chunk felt very essay-esque. If that's a word.
Essayistic.
Yeah. And then it was framed with a very like conventional narrative structure on each end of it. It seemed like. I feel like she's just laughing at us the whole time, though, because like on 220, when I'd already given up on trying to guess where the book would go next, Ferris abruptly changes direction and begins elaborating on a wild premise. This is what it's like reading this. This is exactly what I'm feeling right now. Thank you for pointing out my own feelings.
Also related to that in this kind of like Alephian, Borgesian way. So what if Divabar did survive and turn up elsewhere? Just maybe he turned up everywhere else on Earth, is like the widow's obituary that she references back at the beginning, where she's born in all those different places, and every single different obituary has a different set of stats about her, or different sort of facts. It's another one of those. I love this section. I love this book. The more that it goes along, the more it's like, it's easy to sink into once you start to pick apart some of the pieces. Like I think we said this last week too, but like it's really hard to imagine someone just surfacely reading this and being like, okay, got it. Okay, next book. Like it deserves so much more, and it demands a little bit more, and by giving it a little bit more, you get so much more out of it.
So not to put you on the spot, Anthony, but how the hell do you like market something like this to the to the mouth breathing Americans like myself that are
I will wait before you answer that. Before you answer that, I'm gonna stall. Don't answer. Yeah, I'm gonna remind you, Brian, of something you told me about. I don't know. It was a few years ago now. That one day you said that you're out on your porch on your balcony and you look downstairs and there's a guy walking with his hat turned backwards and it was sunny outside. It was like summertime. His hat on backwards and the sun was shining. And so he put up his hand to like block the sun glare. And you're like, that's who you're marketing international literature to. The guy who wears his hat backwards and puts his hand
to
to
visor the sun out of his eyes.
Too bright outside.
Like, good luck giving him. You want to read Dubravka or Who? Huh?
Now you can answer.
Yeah. I don't know if I have an answer to that question.
Well, yeah, I don't know what you signed up for, but you do realize for whatever reason, Chad doesn't like to have like fastballs down the middle. Like everything, like these are all difficult.
There's no 0-0 pitch, yo. There's no 0-0 pitch.
Everything is. I mean, and in one way or another, there's some difficulty to everything you guys do, which is great. There's not a lot of folks that are willing to do that. But
yeah, I mean,
a coloring book every now and then wouldn't hurt,
Oh my God,
we could do a coloring book of Obero or whatever Obero writers.
Yeah,
Daniel Carm's getting drunk riding a goat. I'm not going to answer entirely for you, but I think leaning into that isn't the worst thing. People want something different.
I agree. I wasn't researching, but like I've been listening to some stuff about this. I read an article where I heard a new term, the intellectual dark web. Is that what it's called?
Oh yeah.
Have you heard of this? Yeah. So it's like it's people that are getting news and information and lectures from like non-conventional media sources, because conventional media sources just like spoon feed you something simple and quick and a snippet. And like there's people out there that are thirsting for something a little bit more nuanced and bigger and with more depth to it. And so they'll listen to like a stupid ass 3-hour podcast of like Joe Rogan or something, right?
Okay.
And here's some crackpot give his take on how the pyramids are for healing you with vibrations or something like that. But yeah, he'll bring them on, let them talk for 3 hours. Whereas if that person was on the news, they would get to talk for 30 seconds. So maybe there is an audience of people that want something difficult that takes time, and you guys are definitely providing that.
I mean, that's sort of proven by everyone who's listening to this too. Like we have grown a good following that you could all this is a segue into plugging us on iTunes and or whatever you get your podcast from. You could always rate us and recommend us. But seriously, there has been like an audience that's been built, and like there is that idea that like people do, and not to go down your path entirely, which might end in a weirder place, but like that there is like people do want something that's challenging. There's a constituency that doesn't want just Tom Clancy novels.
Cinematic realism.
Yeah, that there's an enjoyment to reading this book. There's an enjoyment to reading it slowly.
Yeah,
like there's an enjoyment to like we even like.
No, this is so much fun, and like Frizan is tremendous amounts of fun. And then I found Death in Spring was like wild. Like it made me want to take a shower after every chapter I read, but it's unlike anything that's on the market right now. It's exotic, it's fun, it's interesting, it's different, it challenges you, it makes you think differently, it makes you want to write differently. So I love it.
Part of it, I think, is not having difficulty for the sake of difficulty as well, knowing that there's going to be a payoff. And I think that's probably part of what this podcast is about and what Open Letter is about. The subscription model is something that's a little different, and that Open Letter builds readers' trust over time. So you've read the Frizan, so now you're going to look at this Fox and you've already read that and you trusted that there was going to be a payoff, and there was. So you know there's going to be a payoff again. So going into the difficulty, you're already willing to put in the work.
Yeah, this is the one that destroyed me on page 204 at the very bottom of it. She was one of the generation of Russians for whom setting aside a month's salary to purchase a black market copy of The Master and Margarita was perfectly acceptable choice.
I love that.
Is there any, I was trying to think, like, would I put away a month's salary to buy a book? And the answer is no. Like, absolutely not, right?
But did you, okay, fair.
And I don't make much in a month, but like.
Have you ever stolen a book?
Does Playboy count? When I wasn't allowed to buy pornography, and before the internet existed, I would still Playboy. But
have you ever stolen a book, Anthony?
No, I've never stolen a book.
I have not stolen a book, but I've had too many stolen from me, so I'm on the other end.
I stole William Faulkner's Sanctuary from Schuler Books and Music straight off of in Okemos, off of East Grand River. When I was in college, I didn't have enough money, and all I wanted to read was Faulkner books, and I loved Faulkner. And so they had a table outside of like their they were discounted books, but they were still like, you know, $5 or something, and I didn't really have it. I literally had no money. I was like a freshman in college, and so I just straight up stole Sanctuary, and I read it though, and I loved it, and I love Faulkner to this day. So
yeah,
I just admitted to a crime. It's a minor crime. I also worked for Schuler Books and Music, and they stole part of my soul and exploited it for money, so it's fair.
According to my religious parents, I just admitted to a crime. I looked at a woman with lustful thoughts in my heart. So that's a crime.
Also a crime.
Yeah. No, but
equal stature.
That was a wonderful line to read of like,
I love that.
Wow, a month's salary for a book. Like, that's incredible. It's sad, but it's incredible.
It's not completely related, but I remember when I was in Estonia the first time, there's a woman that was there who was talking about living under Soviet times. And she's like, it sucked. In so many ways, it sucked. But the nice thing was that you had time to like share samizdat writing and read. And that now that we don't have the Soviet times, all we're doing is not reading and not sharing books illegally. Like, we don't give as much credence to them. We don't care. They're all available. And now it's just spent time like in an office trying to create value for something else. And it's sort of a weird thing, because the Soviet Union not good in so many regards. But on that weird level of like the importance of literature, the importance of writing, the importance of like that sharing, and of like wanting to spend your money on a book or wanting to like be involved with like literary culture, that's very palpable. And like that isn't something that's part of the capitalist model. And it goes back to what I was going to say earlier, as a weird sort of point, is that we talk a lot with this podcast is set up to like slow things down and to find those connections that you would otherwise probably pass over or just go right by because you're on to the next thing. And we talk a lot in like research about how many books do readers read in a year? How many books can you sell to a customer in a year? Who are your fans? What is your market number? Like, what's possible? And it's all premised upon like making them go faster and faster and get through the books and buy the next book and do the next thing instead of not doing that. And I think like working against that grain allows like a much richer and more humane understanding of what books can do and what words can do and what writers can do than the sort of like nonstop bullet train into the next book sort of vibe that a capitalist society would really love you to have.
Sure. No, I mean, it's like there's a whole section of books you can market for this. You can read this on a flight from Chicago to Atlanta. Like,
yeah,
we have books for that, right?
Book shots.
Yeah.
James Patterson's book shots.
No, like I think I underlined
thoughts and like giving me a sin. I just committed a crime.
Yeah, I think I underlined the entire page of 201, where she's at another literary conference or whatever, and just like her anger and kind of disgust with where literature's going. But in particular, no, I think I might have frozen. Are you still there?
Oh, I'm here.
Okay, I think we lost Chad.
Chad might be gone.
Yeah, but still live. But during the first day of the conference, an already familiar feeling came over me that I'm no longer a player in this game. And she says that the values have changed and the interests today are altogether different. Like they're no longer about literary themes, but they're more about cultural studies. And then a little bit later, she says, literature, whether I liked it or not, was simply no longer the focus. I'm not sure why that one like jumped out at me, but it just seems like, I don't know, maybe like, have you gone to AWP when you were at
course,
Arkansas?
Yeah.
Okay, because you guys started a journal there, right?
We did, yeah.
Literary journal. I'm assuming you had to have a table and all that.
We did the booth.
Yeah.
You shake hands. Yeah.
Yeah. Chad, are you back? Oh, never mind. But like the panels on there, like I would always assume at a AWP conference, the panels would be highly focused and streamlined towards literary themes, but the majority of them aren't.
No,
it's
not at all.
Yeah. But this is, I mean, something she saw a long time coming, it seems. But yeah.
Yeah, it's super interesting, her relationship between kind of looking back and looking forward and her place in it, because it's not as simple as things are moving in a bad direction that you would get from kind of a lesser writer.
Yeah.
And she talks about, there's a quote from Ira, about Ira, how about she's lamenting contemporary culture, which she didn't understand well. So it's not as simple as that, because she also admits when she's at that other conference and the people keep getting her name wrong. At first she's like irate, but then she's like, well, they're right, it doesn't matter. And yeah, that was just, it saved a lot of it for me, how she's unsure exactly how to position herself between what's come and what is coming.
For God's sakes, you had an entire hour to get my name right. It was right there in front of you. You could have Googled me during the talk. You all have iPhones and iPads. I assume you aren't lost in the world, I said. Are you really this touchy? Sprang a young scholar of Polish immediately to their defense. Surprise, surprise, I am.
Yeah. But she allows herself to look foolish that way, and then later she comes back and says, I was wrong. And then I've got 220 mentioned.
220.
Let's see what I had on that.
Better be good, whatever it is.
Yeah, no. I'm not sure, but it was relating to that, and it was so weird because as I was reading this, I was also reading an article that someone posted on Twitter that was lamenting the loss of mayonnaise as a condiment because the millennials have killed it. And as a contrast to that, this kind of self-awareness and self-humor at her own kind of obsolescence.
Yeah.
At the same time as people like raging against this, it read like a parody article, but it was completely real.
Yeah.
Just the contrast of those at the same time was super weird.
Yeah, to me that was something I completely connected with, because we just did a conference and I was like super narrowed in on wanting it all to be literary themed, like about craft, and then like you can't get away from it becoming about cultural studies or something about modern culture. But I was talking about page 201 where she's lamenting, and again she's at another literary panel, and Anthony, earlier on there's it starts off with her being at a literary panel with the widow, so it's fun that there's another literary panel thing. But I was wondering though, Chad, this was kind of directed towards you, where she says literature, whether I liked it or not, was simply no longer the focus.
Yeah,
because she was saying how there were hardly any talks on literary themes, and it's all been brought into cultural studies.
I'm going to assume
that your view of things. We talked briefly about AWP while you were gone and your computer crashed, how AWP has less to do with craft and more about Like,
if anyone's watching this, by the way, make sure that can you please say a message that this video did not cut off? Please just send that message. Anyways, that feels like a little bit of maybe gaslighting or baiting me, because you've probably heard my rants about how a lot of university courses, they don't involve literature anymore at all. Like, literature is the last thing. Like, most of the professors don't want to. There's a lot of classes about film.
Sure.
And cultural studies. So yeah, I think that is a common trend right now, and it makes sense to some degree. It's sort of, there is something that I think is lost at times, where there's something value to be gained from reading a book slowly than there is from just talking about the cultural issues, or just talking about a film that you can digest in 2 hours, or talking about the importance of a video game. There's also this. There's all those things can work together. And that's when things, I think, classes or discussions or conferences or whatever work really well. But when you exclude any part of them, they feel a little bit like forced.
No, it's interesting, because in my own teaching, I've noticed I'm having to give examples from like Star Wars and Jaws.
Yeah.
You know, because if I mention a story by Isaac Babel or something, like, good luck getting everybody to connect with that, right? Like, never going to happen. But,
and it is like the good bad of culture. Like, it's good that there's not a monoculture anymore in which everyone's watching like some shitty sitcom in which it's all the same group of like bourgeois white people telling people what's funny, and that we're not all talking about. Yeah, Friends. So
I love Friends.
It's good that it's not that anymore.
Sure.
And at the same time, there needs to be, then there's that's all pulled apart. So there's all these other options, and then within those little options, finding your community can be either like become like a sphere, or it can become something that's an interesting reflection to a larger culture. And I think that's something that's being negotiated constantly in terms of like everything we write about, talk about, how we teach classes. That's always a part of that whole situation. And it's good because it makes things complicated.
Yeah, I didn't want to train wreck the episode by like going down that path, but when that brief section of the conference that she's at, like, I super identified with like for me, like, I just want to talk about the literature, right? But then those aren't the discussions right now. So.
It's like it does remind me of the part, and again, I think I mentioned this before, but in Invented Part, where the main character is like, the author is like ranting at that panel about like, no one cares anymore. They're just playing on their phones and no one gives a shit. And they're like, dude, chill out. Like, people want to
what is wrong with you? Relax,
like,
man.
They want to watch TV.
Yeah.
Like, dial it down. So do you guys have a favorite section that you wanted, or favorite quote that you wanted to read from? Also, the video did not cut out, so we're good. So I'm probably gonna hardly edit this. So whatever things happen, you guys heard it. We had a minor technical difficulty, but we're all back here. And does anyone want to pick out their favorite quote?
Let me give you just a couple brief ones that I think might be right down your guys' alley on page 190 and 191. There's a line that says, "Literary value is all about lobbying." And then it goes on, "Her ultimate goal is to draw the biggest number of devotees to her side. In this sense, she has no morals. Anything is better than semi-anonymity." And then a little bit lower, "Everything matters when selling a product, and a literary work is a product."
Yep. Well done. Well done.
Good luck selling your fancy hard books in America, assholes.
Oh dear.
No, there's a billion lines on this that are so good.
I have so many paragraphs that are just circled.
I know. I
didn't really have like. I mean, aside from my two favorite, I'll do my two favorite, and then you can go, Anthony. How remarkable that Spider-Man knew nothing of this.
Yeah.
Oh, that was my favorite. Sure. I was looking for my little post-it.
It's so good. So good. And then the other one, I listen to her and wonder where I get this feeling, justified by nothing, that I'm superior to this woman. There's no difference in essence between us, which harkens back to, I guess it's a balancing art again, is the section when she's talking about the, it's that, oh God, the person that comes and works in her house and is working on the stilts and is doing like the sort of puppet stilt artistic thing.
Is it Marlene? I might be wrong.
I think it's Marlene. I think you're right.
And God, on 233, that whole freaking chunk about coming back to her home being fragmented and all the stuff that's holy shit.
Yep.
That is beautiful, beautiful writing right there. Holy cow, that whole part.
I mean, I give the next page a big star next to whether Ira Ferris's efforts at research are credible or not matters less. What does matter is that the text remains.
Yep. Go again to you can't burn a manuscript, right?
Nope. And you can't burn a non-existent manuscript.
The power of the imagination and the creativity can outstrip the very power of words on paper. In that sense, manuscripts truly do not burn.
Irina Ferris was a memorable name, especially because it sounded so much like a well-designed pseudonym.
Yeah. Again, man.
She's so good.
She's laughing at me, and I'm okay with it. I'm totally okay with it.
Yep. Dang. Any last thoughts from either of you guys?
Oh, I want to do a quote.
Okay. Yeah, I got one.
The secret may lie with longevity, and we barely know anything about the secret of longevity. I thought that unlocked so much of it for me, because so much is about these twisted legacies and footnotes on footnotes of footnotes, and people who write about footnotes who don't even get to be footnote. And I thought
it's funny that you bring that up too, because that does tie back into the section with the widow is where the narrator is talking about how the widow is keeping his legacy alive, and that Levin has passed away, and she gathers all of her power through like making sure that people keep reading him, and the longevity comes from that. And there was a whole section when we talked about that, we talked with Ellen Elias Bursek, the translator, and she was mentioning that Dubravka talks about like, we know who's going to be the person that keeps my papers alive? Who keeps papers alive? Who are the paper keepers?
Who's my caretaker? Who's my...
And that sort of ties into that idea of longevity. It's not just the body or the soul, but the papers.
But it seems even with all that effort, the best you can do is turn a footnote into a somewhat longer footnote. Like that's the best case scenario. Yeah. And that's kind of heartbreaking, but also beautiful, I think.
We're all just footnotes.
We're all the same.
So
also one last question. I know we're right at the end of the line. I noticed that it is translated by Ellen and David Williams.
Yeah.
Which part is there? Did they take different chunks?
I think I mentioned this at the very beginning, but like on the very first episode. But David translated the first section, and that's part one. So he translated part one, and I forget where it was published. It's probably in here. It's not. Part one was translated by him, but I forget. I feel like it was both for the agent, but it was also published somewhere. It was like, I don't remember where. And then Ellen did everything else.
That's the part about Boris and the...
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Which ties right back into this, another Russian writer.
Pelniak. Yeah, he's in. Okay.
And Levin doubles him by also moving eastward too. So or possibly.
Yeah.
It's so tight. Like it's tighter than it seems. When you start to weave all those threads together and all those motifs, like it's much more intricate than it seems on first glance and first read.
Well, I'm excited for part 5, Little Miss Footnote, because I'm just to give a quick the quote in the front of this: human life is but a series of footnotes to a vast, obscure, unfinished masterpiece. Vladimir Nabokov.
So we are going to have we're going to skip next week because I'm going to be at another KOA, which is like my livelihood apparently in the summer, where there's no Wi-Fi that works. So we're going to skip next week. We're going to be back the Tuesday after this Tuesday. So that would be the 28th of August. And we'll be talking to Caitlin Luce Baker from Seattle. We talked to her about the last book. I forget which section it was, but about Physics of Sorrow. And it was one of the early ones. And she said that she wanted this section because she wanted to go a deep dive into this story of Nabokov and finding a butterfly. and Dorothy, who drove him and Vera across country. Ironically, I just read a book that also references this story in like a tangential way and has a lot to do with Lolita and how a footnote became a story. And it's 100% about Sally Horner and how Sally Horner was a footnote in Nabokov's reading that then became Lolita. So that episode has a lot of like extraneous material that will be pressing in on it. It's also wonderful, and you, Brian, will love it.
Well, I can't wait to be again woefully underprepared and undereducated for it. Cannot wait.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you like butterflies?
Sure.
You and Isaac can go to the butterfly garden a bunch of times between now and then.
What's a butterfly? Is it Lepidoptera or is that the stamp person? I can't remember. I get the stamp I always get stamp collectors and butterfly collectors confused. They're both weirdos, but yeah.
Now I can't think of the stamp collecting one. It doesn't matter. Anyways, so Anthony, where can we find you online aside from at Open Letter?
On Twitter. Anthony
What's your
J.
Twitter?
Blake. At Anthony J. Blake.
Perfect. And Brian's at Brian Wood _
You can find me on Tinder, on Grindr, on Grubhub. I'm all over the place. Yeah.
All the social medias.
Brian Wood _ Yes, that's where I'm at.
Cool. I'm at Chad W. Post, and we're also at Open _ Letter, where you can find information about all our future guests and all our podcasts and everything else. I don't think I have anything else to add. Do you guys have anything you want to end off with?
This was a tough section, but I liked it a lot. It was a lot of fun.
I love this section. I also think that you should read Daniel Harms or Carms, however you pronounce it correctly, because you will love him.
And I think you should stop telling me what to do and trying to force your agenda on me. Goodbye. I'm done. That's enough. No more.